The ghost of a smile felt foreign on my lips. It wasn't a happy smile, not really. It was the quiet, settled smile of a debt finally paid. I stood across the street from what used to be Vance Architecture, a titan of glass and steel, now a hollowed-out skeleton. Plywood covered the great windows where Julian used to stand, looking down on the city like a king. A bright orange for sale sign hung crookedly from the frame, slapped on like a cheap bandage over a mortal wound. This was the finish line. But just a week ago, I was still holding my breath, clutching an impossible gift. I'd been standing in my small apartment, the scent of old paper and rosin filling the air. The Stradivarius violin lay in my hands, a priceless relic from a life I thought was buried forever. Julian had spent years convincing me that my music was a hobby, a distraction from my real job, supporting his genius. And now, with his empire crumbling from the rot I'd exposed, this instrument had appeared on my doorstep. It was a victory trophy from a secret admirer, a terrifying new piece on a board I thought I controlled. The war was nearly over, but as I stood there, a chilling question bloomed in the silence. Whose piece was this, and what would it cost me? My phone buzzed, shattering the quiet. The screen read Maria, Julian's lead designer. His partner in business and betrayal. I almost let it go to voicemail, but a cold curiosity made me answer. "Eleanor," she said, her voice tight with a panic she was failing to conceal. "We need to talk." "I can't imagine what about," I said, my tone flat as a frozen lake. "Don't play games. I know you're the one behind this. The leaks to the press, the anonymous tip to the SEC. It has your fingerprints all over it." There was a sound of a shaky exhale. "Look, he used both of us. He promised me a partnership, my name on the door. He lied. He was going to cut me out the second the ink was dry on the waterfront deal." I said nothing. I just let her frantic confession hang in the air between us. "I have everything, Eleanor," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The original blueprints he stole from that young architect in Chicago, the offshore account statements, the real ones, enough to put him away for decades. We can destroy him, together." A year ago, that offer might have sounded like salvation. Now it just sounded desperate. I walked over to my window, looking down at the streetlights starting to flicker on. "You seem to be confused, Maria," I said softly. "You think this is a negotiation? You think you have something I need?" She started, but I cut her off. "I know about the blueprints. I know about the accounts. I also know about the engineering degree from Cornell you've been faking for the last 10 years. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world turning to dust. Julian was careless. I continued, my voice calm, precise. He kept a file on everyone he considered a threat or a tool. You were both. He called it his insurance. I just happened to find the policy. "You can't," she whispered, the sound barely audible. "I'm not destroying Julian, Maria," I said, the final words twisting like a knife. "I'm just turning on the lights. You and he are the roaches who will scurry when they do. Goodbye." I hung up before she could respond. The call had settled one thing. My plan was working even better than I'd imagined. His own allies were turning on him like starving dogs. But the violin still sat there, a beautiful, unnerving mystery. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Vance?" a man's voice asked. It was older, with a low, gravelly timbre I recognized but couldn't immediately place. "Who is this?" I asked. "My name is Arthur Sterling. We met once several years ago at a fundraiser for the Philharmonic." The name clicked into place. Sterling, the old money industrialist. Julian had designed a small gallery for his art collection. I remembered Julian complaining that Sterling had been difficult, nitpicking every detail, questioning every expense. Julian had called him a dinosaur. "I remember, Mr. Sterling," I said, my mind racing. "Why are you calling me?" "To congratulate you," he said simply, "and to admit I may have assisted in your project." My blood ran cold. "Assisted? I don't know what you mean. Please, Mrs. Vance, let's not be coy." I've been watching Julian for 5 years, ever since he built my gallery. He cut corners. He swapped out materials I'd specified for cheaper knockoffs and billed me for the originals. It wasn't about the money, of course. It was the principle, the sheer, unmitigated arrogance. This was the twist. The one variable I never saw coming. I thought I was fighting alone, a ghost in Julian's machine, but I'd had a silent, powerful partner all along. When I saw the first news story about the structural issues at the waterfront project, Sterling continued, I knew it was his signature, so I made some inquiries. My people found the trail of breadcrumbs you'd left. It was brilliant, by the way, meticulous. You weakened the foundations. I just provided the final gust of wind to knock the whole thing over. It all made sense. The final, damning evidence that had been leaked directly to the federal regulators, that wasn't me. It was him. He had taken my surgical strikes and turned them into a carpet bombing campaign. The violin, I breathed, understanding dawning. A Stradivarius needs to be played, Mrs. Vance, he said, a hint of warmth in his voice. It's a crime to keep it in a glass case. Your husband committed a great many crimes, but silencing your music may have been the worst of them. Consider it a gift, a thank you for doing what I never could. He was gone. I stood there staring at the phone. My revenge wasn't just mine. It was a shared vengeance, a justice served for everyone Julian had trampled on his way to the top. The violin wasn't a threat. It was an affirmation. The final act came 2 days later. The news was everywhere. Vance Architecture had declared bankruptcy. The board had resigned. Arrest warrants had been issued for Julian and his senior partners, including Maria. It was over. There was a knock on my door. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Julian stood there, looking like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes, those charismatic, confident eyes, were wide with a desperate, hunted look. I opened the door. Julian, Ellie, he rasped, stepping inside without being invited. He looked around my small apartment, a look of disgust on his face. This is where you live now? After everything I gave you? You gave me a cage, I said, my voice steady. A beautiful, gilded cage. I prefer this. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a trapped animal. You did this. You ruined me. Everything I built, our life. Why? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You want to know why? I'll tell you. It wasn't just the affair with Maria. I could have almost forgiven that. People make mistakes. I paused, letting the words hang. It was the phone call I overheard, the one to your old mentor, right after you proposed. You told him you had a plan to manage my ambitions. You told him a concert pianist's wife was inconvenient for a man like you. You needed me here, a perfect, silent hostess in the background of your perfect life. The color drained from his face. He remembered. You didn't just cheat on me, Julian, I said, the words as cold and sharp as ice. You surgically dismantled my soul. You convinced me my passion was a flaw. You made me believe my dreams were too small for your world. You tried to erase me piece by piece until all that was left was a reflection of you. He stared at me, speechless. The charismatic architect, the master manipulator, had no words left. The worst part, I said, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a near whisper, is that for a while I believed you. That's the one thing I will never, ever forgive. He finally broke. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he stammered, his eyes pleading. I loved you, Ellie. In my own way I did. No, I said, the word a final, clean cut. You loved the idea of me. You loved the porcelain doll you could put on a shelf. The real me was always a threat. As if on cue, 2 sharp knocks echoed from the door. Julian flinched like he'd been shot. I opened it to find 2 grim-faced detectives in dark suits. Julian Vance, one of them asked, though it wasn't a question. Julian looked from them to me, a dawning horror on his face. He thought I had called them. But I hadn't. I didn't need to. This was just the natural, inevitable end of the path he had chosen. This was gravity. The sterile click of the handcuffs was the last sound I heard before they led him away. He didn't look back, and that's how I found myself standing across from his ruined legacy, the for sale sign flapping in the autumn wind. There was no elation, no thrill of victory, just a profound, quiet calm. the end of a long, discordant piece of music. Later that evening, I went home. The city lights twinkled outside my window. I didn't turn on the lamps. I just stood in the twilight, letting the silence of my new life settle around me. I opened the violin case. I lifted the Stradivarius to my chin, the wood warm against my skin. I drew the bow across the strings, and a single, perfect note filled the room. It was a note of grief, of loss, of pain, and then another followed, and another. I wasn't playing for an audience in a grand hall. I wasn't playing for revenge. I was playing for the woman Julian had tried to bury. I was playing for myself. The music swelled, a story of a caged door swinging open, not with a crash, but with a quiet, final click. When the last note faded, the silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was peace. Next time on Cold Karma, a beloved family doctor, a secret will, and a prescription for murder.